Hello? Hey Taylor, how you doing, man?
Hello?
Hey, yeah, I was just messaging you, actually.
Oh yeah.
How's everything?
It's been alright. How about yours?
Pretty good. We're almost pretty much done, right? Like it's like second week, then next week.
Yeah, I think next week is the next weekend is the final.
Okay. Are you guys? Yeah, supposedly I'm not correcting any of the exams. I'm just doing this assignments. So like, did you guys already correct the exam one?
Oh, so I didn't grade that one
Oh,
because I
okay.
forgot to get to the meeting. I completely forgot there's a meeting that day.
Yeah.
Um, but she
Okay,
said she'll
that's
give me more exams to grade for the final, I'm guessing. Yeah.
okay. Okay, but do you know if it's already like posted? I think because we can just tell them
Yeah,
to.
yeah, I think people are getting the regrade request. I think it's due it was due Monday, like this week. But I
Okay,
could be wrong.
okay, I think it is. Well, I didn't put that in here, but
Yeah.
it's like I
Uh,
was looking at Piazza and there were some regrades already. So
yeah, yeah.
okay, yeah. Like did you look at Piazza this week? Were there a lot of questions?
Um, there wasn't like much for CL4. Like I think people don't really ask questions for a coding lab, but more so for the assignments.
Okay,
But yeah, but today I'm just gonna go over the hardest questions, kind of like guide them through,
okay,
and
that's good.
then yeah,
Did-
give them
Were
some
you
hints. Yeah.
Were you able to look at like there was like a website on I don't know if I have the wrong like coding lab like this is the right one, right? Here, look at this. Let's see. Exit this out first. This is the right one, right? It starts off like this.
Yeah, I got mine through Data Hub, so I don't know if the professor changed. Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah, like the GitHub part, it wasn't on the like this summer session's coding
This
lab. So I'm guess
oh so
yeah,
this is gone. Okay.
yeah. So I was kind of confused, and then I kind of figured
Okay.
that you were looking at the old coding labs from the
Probably.
quarters from like regular time like school year.
Do we have daytime as well?
Yeah, I'm gonna go over the challenge or exploration, I think that part.
Okay. So it's kind of similar. It's just but probably just the other
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. It's kind of funny because we kind of covered some of these already.
Hmm.
All right. Hey guys, we're gonna begin in a bit.
Should we start? Call Paul.
Maybe just 2 minutes. It's kind of short today. It's like only
Okay.
4 people. Yeah. Just for 2 minutes, guys, and we'll start. Okay, I guess we can start. All right, guys. Welcome to your Coding Lab 4. You're almost done with the class. So I hope you guys enjoyed your exam 1. I believe that's already graded. But if you guys need regrades, just let us know on Piazza. And I've been correcting the assignments. You guys are also doing a good job. You should receive, I think, your assignment 3 graded by Friday or at the latest Monday. But today it's going to be a bit short. We'll start out with the week 4 as usual FAQs, and then just some logistics. So your coding lab 4 is due tonight before midnight, and then your assignment 4 is due next week Monday before midnight. And just for the demo today, if you click the Google Drive link I sent you, we're primarily going to focus more on classes today. So I'll explain that in a bit. But Taylor, you want to talk about FAQs?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Let me just zoom in. All right. So first, I will talk about the Python documentation. So this is like the official guide to Python, how to use functions that are built in. And then this is the website, the link that shown on the first cell. So here are all the possible like built-in functions. Make sure that you choose the right version because there are different versions of Python. And then let's say you want to use the len function and click on it, and then it shows you the syntax and then what it does. So this link can be useful if you want to look up some documentation on how to use a function. And then I'll just dive right into the coding lab. Part 1 is pretty straightforward. It's just trying to raise the errors by on purpose. And then part 2, the hint I could give is to use the try and except. So what it does is like say you have something up here, like blah blah blah, and then you want to do something. So you say try print x. But if this code fails, except and print this variable is not defined. So obviously I didn't define x at all in this cell or before. So what it's going to do is print that statement. Variable is not defined. But also what you can do is if you want to print something that's specific to an error, say like the name error because x is not defined, it's going to print name error. So you can do all sorts of different errors that are part of part 1 in this coding lab. And then part 3 is more challenging. I think it says on the coding lab anyways, but let me just import the libraries. And then to define a date, you do the date function, date of, so the syntax is year, month, and the date. So I want to define 1994, January 2nd. And when I run this, it's gonna, or let me see, print that. It's gonna give me that year, month, and date. And one of the questions asked about the possible minimum and the maximum date with the date function, just do date.min and date.max, and it's gonna print year 1, January 1st, and I guess the year 999, that day, although we'll probably never get to that date in our lifetime. And and then this is the question in part 3, I believe. And then I'm just gonna go step by step and show you guys how to do it. So the question is if you start on this date and then add 8 dates until you reach the year 1800, how many Mondays will there be? So there are 2 parts of this question, where the first part asks you to get the answer to this, but the next part asks you to make a general function. So I'll just go over the general function, and hopefully that helps you answer the question. So I'm defining a function called count_weekdays, and that takes in all these inputs as specified on the question. And then I'm gonna do days to add is the 8 days that you're adding to each like iteration. So I'm gonna do time delta, let's see, delta, and then you see the number of days that you're adding is defined as add_days. So what you can do is days equals add days. But this way, you're not hard coding the number 8, for example, like that. So here, let me do that. And then adding, so this is a variable that holds the Boolean true, and I'll explain that later as we go on. And then I'm counting how many weekdays, or I guess like Mondays there are in this case. And I'm gonna put 0 because we start with 0 number because we didn't do any iteration yet. And then the check date, I'm just gonna define that as the start date. And notice how these all variables are defined in the function. Let's see. And then back to the while equals true part. So when you substitute this true here, it's saying while true, run whatever is under here. And then you notice that on the bottom, I put adding equals false. So once this code runs, the adding variable turns to false. So this statement runs don't run anymore, and it's gonna return the weekday count. So check date is you add the days to add, right? 8 days per iteration. So you do plus equals is the short term for plus, or equals check date plus this, what I'm writing right now, days to add. And then, so is a weekday is a part of the date time library. And let me just pull this up. Oh, here it is. So this is like how they do it. So when it equals to, when it's a weekday equals 1, that means it's Monday, and so forth. 7 equals Sunday. And then we already defined that as what is it? Weekday. Weekday is the day you want to find out. So what you're gonna do is if check date dot is a weekday equals weekday. So for us, we'll be looking for 1. Like, so if on a hard code, it would be like 1 like that. But since we're creating a general function, we just do weekday. Then you add the weekday count plus 1. So when it equals Monday, you just add 1 to the weekday count. And then we obviously want to stop at the year 1800, or 1800. But again, since we're making a general function, we define the stop year. So when the check date that year is bigger or equal to stop year, we stop the whole iteration, and then return the weekday count. So let me run this function. And then you see how we're inputting all these inputs into the function. So this is the date time you want to start with. And then 3 is the number of days you want to add per iteration. And this is the year you want to stop. And then this is the, I think 5 was Friday, I think. Let's see. So it's going to assert that if this is correct. And it is correct because it's not raising false. So this is like a guide to the coding question in part 3. And then part 4 deals with classes. So I've created my like a simple own class to just give you guys an idea how to do it. So you always start with class, some name, and then you define the init function and with self, and then all these variables you want to do. Now you almost always do self.name equals like all these like coding. It's pretty simple. Self dot whatever the variable you define equals the variable, and then all these, and then so on and so forth. And then I'm gonna define a new function under the class that says who am I, and then all this is print something, right? So I'm printing hello, my name is space string, and then concatenating self.name. So whatever the name is inputted is printed. And then I'm currently a plus. And since the level input is an integer, you have to convert that to string because you can't add string with an integer. So it's the string method, the string, whatever the input is, plus the year in, and then college, studying, and then major. So let me just run this. And you notice that I define a variable called Taylor, and then call this class. So UCSD, my name is Taylor Han, the year is 4th year, college is Warren, and the major is Coxsci. But let me see. So only running that doesn't do anything because you didn't call the who am I function. So if you want to print whatever this says, you gotta do Taylor dot who am I and then the open parentheses and close parentheses. And what that's gonna do is run that. So it says, hello, my name is Taylor Han, and I'm currently a 4th year in Warren studying Coxsci. And obviously you can create more stuff. Here, let me see. It's a long syntax. Yeah, so you can create more, I don't know, like another function self, and then do something under here. And then if you want to call this function, you just do another function, and then it's going to run whatever this has to do. So hopefully this gives you guys an idea how to do coding lab 4. I think the hardest part was the datetime manipulation. So yeah, this is for my hints for this week.
Okay, thank you, Taylor. That was really good, actually.
No worries.
All right, so just to show you guys like where the coding lab is for this week, we kind of covered some of this last week. Hoping you guys can go to CL3 and then maybe look at some of those. But like the first part, I think Sylvia too, if you guys go to the Monday one, she covered parts 1 to 3. But primarily today, we'll just talk about part 4, I believe. Oh, let me just give you guys this in case some of you guys just came in. And okay, so for part 1, it's going to be doing some debugging. Debugging is just a way to fix your errors. And Taylor just mentioned some where you can find some of these errors, how to fix them in documentation. So that's a helpful thing to do. And if you guys don't know that website, just type in like Python documentation. It should give you that. And just look at like what version you have though. And then yeah, you have to do some of these, like fixing some errors. It'll be helpful. I always find it very useful to like know how to debug like simple stuff first. That way, that when you guys are gonna do this more in the future, you'll kind of anticipate, before you write like long code. Oh yeah, and just click on that. Taylor just mentioned something. And for debugging challenges, I want you guys are going to talk, we talked about functions before. It's just a way for you guys to like practice, like, combining conditionals and then I think maybe loops. Yeah, it's always good to, like kind of combine the things that you guys know and then put them inside functions. Especially today, we're going to talk more of like a hierarchical, like a higher hierarchy of a function, which we call class. So this is when it really matters, when you apply like every bit and piece that we've taught you guys. And so this part isn't really in the new code, but for part 3 here, we're going to talk about we're going to we're going to talk about more about what it means to do like an object-oriented programming. Like when we say objects, it's technically everything, like everything you've known so far, like commands, lists, collections, classes, functions, all those are objects. And then this is how we're creating it. Every time you're, calling something out, that's what you call an object. So, but then in general, that's what it is. And later on, I think it's in the next module, we'll probably talk about more about like modular programming. And then we kind of emphasize this a lot, where we want you guys to, like, in the beginning, it's good to know and define things specifically, and then in like, like hard code something, and that's good when you're trying to learn like coding for the first time. But then the more you, the ultimate goal is to become more like a general programmer. Right? As what we've talked about, like creating a function for something that you find that you find a pattern in, and that you can reuse that function and many times, because it's always good to I would say, like, it's always good to, I mean, the back end of it, when you're trying to figure out that function and how to create it, it might take a while, but in the long run, it's going to help you. So you may struggle in the beginning, like trying to find that pattern, but the more you do it, the better it is. Like you guys have learned like pseudo coding. It's just a way to, like, you think about the like real world like mechanics, or like things like phenomena that you can create a function for, and then the pseudocode kind of like guides you into how to make that more general, or finding that function, and then you break that down into how do you actually code it. So you're always going to be thinking about that, and the more you do it, like especially this datetime manipulation, like datetime is just a module. It's technically just like that's why we're importing it, but it's an example of a function, sets of functions that you're going to use. And someone made this, and they're very intricate in, like, the type of ways that you can automate things, creating a time, adding a time. And so in essence, like, if you can find, if you can deduce like a function, a real world function into something, into a function, into like what we're going to talk about classes today, which is even more of like a general like object, that's always good. But for part 4, yeah, this is where it gets really exciting, because now we're going to create a class. And creating class, let me show you guys. So today's primarily, the goal here is to hopefully give you like a bare bone, like basics of how to create a class. It's quite easy to apply once you learn it. And like along with anything else, like, when you guys learn like loops, conditionals, and functions, it's just that the system, like the syntax is always the most difficult thing. But we'll try our best to explain like the why and the how. But for our class, what it is really is, it's just, as I said, it's like a higher hierarchy than a function. Like you could put functions within a class, so it goes outside. And what you call within a class, there's these functions and commands that you go. That's what it is. Like these are the objects. Like, like if it's outside the class or inside the class. But when it's actually being used inside the class, it's we call those like attributes and methods. I think you guys learned this in lecture. What an attribute is and a method. But technically these are just, like specific names for the functions within the class. So we'll talk about it very basically and how you're going to use it. But just to give you guys more of a convention on how to write like, how to name your variables, how to name your functions and your classes. There's essentially like 4 different ways or types of cases. Like when I say cases, like lower or uppercase. But here in program, there's like 4 different cases for defining these objects. So the first one here is like Camel Case, and that's, some of these names are really weird, but just go along with it. So this Camel Case, what it does is it combines like words. So what you see here, so this is what a Camel Case is. So the first letter here is lowercase, and there's no space, you're combining it. And then the next, that word is capitalized. So following the first word. So the first word, like letter of the first word is lowercase, but after the first word, the first letter is capitalized. But you're probably wondering, when do we use this? You would use this when you're defining variables and functions. So these are just conventions. Like right now, it doesn't matter how you define it, but we just want to like, let you guys know so you're aware. When you see this out there, like what are they doing? Why are they defining it? Why can't you just put it all lowercase or put like an underscore? But there's really, there's actually these like definitions for these cases. And this is the one that's important, Pascal case, or like cap, I think it's like cap word. Yeah, the Pascal case is when you define your the names with like capitalizing every first letter of every word, and there's no space. And what we use this in Python is, and I think other programming is, we're defining it. We use this case when you're defining a class. So yeah, it's always good practice, because like if you're gonna repeat something, which you will do a lot in coding, try to repeat something correct. So it's always good to know, like when you're doing the class naming, just from now on, try to define it this way. And then for functions, you can use this, a Camel Case as well, but or this one. You can use snake case, which is the third. And what this is just, again, it's combining the words, but then you don't put like a space, you put like an underscore. And then everything here is either all lowercase or all uppercase. So when it's all lowercase, for the snake case, it's usually defining like this field names or database. This is not as, you won't see this as much here. But then when you're defining, I think you've probably seen this when you see constants, like in a function or like an equation, you would see this, and then it's all uppercase. That's the convention, is like to use a snake case with all uppercase for constants. And this I haven't, or actually I have, but not as much in like Python. This is more like HTML stuff. The kebab case. So the kebab case, it's kebab because of this thing right here. So instead of using like an underscore, you would use just like a dash or a hyphen. And then, so you would see this mostly when you're doing like website names or URLs. Okay, so for what we have here, when we're talking about like classes, you technically, you could break them down, like, we broke down the functions before, but for classes, you break them down in like to 3 groups. Like in the general sense, if you're just gonna like look at the like how it's made, you could technically break it down to like the naming. So just like right here is the name. You always define it with a name, with like this class, like keyword, and then the name. So as you can see, the name here, I use a Pascal case. So, and then the next part of a class is like attributes, and you learn this in class. I'm not gonna like really define what they are, but you have this class attribute, and then you also have this instance attribute. So what the class attribute is like this guy right here. So I kind of just included this so you guys will know what it is. So it's a class attribute, and this is just, I mean, you've defined like a variable before. You've declared it outside a class, but once it's inside a class, it has like these like unique names. So like this is called a class attribute. And then this next one right here, every time you see this init method, if you guys know other programming languages, we always, this is sometimes called a constructor, or like an initializer. So so this is what you call like this whole part right here is called the instance attribute, because like you're gonna find out like there's when you create a class, it's just a grouping, and that's what makes it really different from a function, because it's kind of like a factory. So like because a function, you just use that for like, you don't have to define these like variables. It's like a command. You're using it to just do something. But for a class, you're trying to create like a blueprint or like a factory of how you're going to create different variables. And then these different variables that you're going to create following the blueprint is what you call instances. So this blueprint kind of tells you, okay, how are you going to create these different instances? Is because of this. So you're going to find out, what things are in common for like the different instances that you're going to create, and then this is where you put it. So like it's really nifty, because then you don't have to manually define like different things that are common within those objects. So I'll explain this in a bit. And then the next part of a class is like this method. So method, and then this attribute is very similar though, because you can think like this isn't really doing anything. It's an attribute. It's like it's like a characteristic of the instance, and then a method takes those instances or whatever, and then you actually do something with it. So, and then I'll explain this in a bit, but this self convention is very common for classes. In Python, we use like self, and then what this is so you know how we talked about making things very general. What ends up happening, just to explain it here, and I'll show you in a bit, is when you define like, maybe you have like three people, like person 1, person 2, person 3, and then each 3 of those people have like a different height, a different weight, things like that. Those are the instances, the input 1 and 2. And then what ends up happening is, that you're gonna have these different people, and then they're gonna have different instances. And then you wanna do something like maybe you wanna calculate, or create a table of like their heights and weights, or you're gonna do something with them. The people, like people 1 or person 1, person 2, that's what you call it. That's why we have this self, because this self and this self right here is kind of like the dummy variable. So the dummy variable gets passed into the class, and then that's why you only define it here. And the only thing that you do is you call out this class, this whole class for each instance, and they will inherit. Every time you see that person 1, you're gonna replace these. And that's why you always have to pass self to each one of these to make it general. You're gonna see if you don't put self in your method here, it's not gonna work. So anyways, similar to functions, you know how we talked about you have to define them first before you actually use it, and that's self-explanatory. You're gonna define it, and then the other thing is doc strings. So doc strings, you know how like you guys have been documenting, how you guys follow your code better. You always want to document. So in the same way, you define like the inputs, what type they are. You can put that in each one of these, and even the class. And if you remember, you put in like 3 apostrophes or quotations for that. And in order for the before you do this coding block, always follow these three parts, and before you execute this. It just means like before you use it. And just an example for what an attribute looks like, it looks like this. So you have the class name and then dot. So that's an attribute. But then for a method, it's dot method, and you put this parentheses in it. And then init right here is what we call like, this always goes together, init and then self attributes. So these are just words, but like it's gonna make more sense once I break down like how you use them. But they always go together here. And you always wanna put this init every time you wanna initialize something, it's like in a class. As I've already said, that so when you do this, it inherits a lot, for each instance, it inherits these like attributes. And then we're gonna explain later on that things that are local to the variable here, like in a function, are can only be used within the class. Outside of it, you can't call it out. It's because of the, I'll explain that later on when you have like this namespace, because you're inside this, the class itself. And let me see. Oh yeah, and this other part too, once you're defined like an instance, when you define these, you know, like when you call out like a variable name and you put like you put the class name, this is how you define it. After you define your class, you put a variable name and then the class name, and you put all these inputs in it, like all these inputs. So you only define self within the class. You omit or you ignore self when you're doing these instance like definitions. So this self is only within a class, and then when you're defining instances, you only put the inputs. So that's a good thing to remember. And then later on, I'll talk about the what you know, you have nested different functions together, or like, well, actually, no, you nested loops, and then you also nested conditionals. So you could also nest, I call it nesting, but in a way it's just defining different classes. And then what you can do with that is, or how you do that is you do this. You define this old class name, and there's an example that I'm going to show this in a bit. And then this new class that you're going to define next, you just, instead of putting like self, you put that old class name, or like the first one that you define. And the reason for that, and there's another thing you have to remember, but the reason for that is so that it inherits all these attributes of the class. And then when you're defining the method for that new class name, you need to put super. And so that, and then the method or the function name, so that it inherits all these attributes from that old class. Okay, so it's very short. I'm just gonna talk about like, first, this first example is defining a class with methods. So what I have here, I think if you guys have done your assignment, you're gonna see that this is kind of similar, or maybe I think it's a lecture. But how you define a class is you define the, you know, a Pascal case naming, which is this. So you have class here, and then the cat group is what I have. And then when I define it, I have this doc string, you know, just any string, amount of string that's concise and tells us what it does is good. And then when you define something like this, just, you know, it's not a function, it's just like a variable like definition. This is what you call a class attribute. So this one will be common for all. You'll see it, and then this next one right here is when I have definition, and this is defining a method. So it's a function within a class, which is like just a method. And so how you would access, let me show you guys first. How would you access like the help when you're looking up that, you know, the class itself, is just do this. You say, so you define the class first, and then help, then the name of the class. So when you do that, you're gonna see this, you know, what you wrote here. Okay. And then what I have here is how you're gonna call out, like initialize the class, like the instances. So what I mean by that, when you're gonna call out the class, or you initialize the class, it's just, you're gonna assign it to a variable, and then that's calling it out. And then this one is not as complex, because I'm just trying to teach you guys like, okay, what are these different parts? But after you do that, you can always do it separately and just say, what if I wanted to get this part, the class attribute of the class? So after you define it with a variable, just put in the variable and then dot, and then you put in sound. So this is what you call an attribute, because it doesn't have the parentheses, right? And then the next one, when you want to like output the function, the command within your method, just do this. You don't really need to put print, because we already defined that here. So all you have to do is just the variable, and then dot, you know, whatever this name of your method is, and make sure you don't forget the parentheses. And then, so both of those, I just coincidentally made them equal to each other. So that's like doing two things the same way. And then this next one here is, now that you've learned what a method is within a class, let's talk about the attributes. Like, let's expand on that. So you have this class and an instance, right? So for this group, I have this class name zoo group. So again, you have to make sure you define it like this and then now I'm defining the class attribute. And then now I've added this new thing. So when you do this, like, this is what we call the instance attribute. So, you have this init, and there's always a convention. You put the def, 2_ init, and then 2_. And how you define this is, so you always have self here. Yeah, and then the next things that you define are just the arguments here, are just your inputs that you want to have each one of your objects or instances that you want to define. So for me, what I want to know is, I want to have, like, for my zoo here, I want to have like different animals, right? Or the different sounds to make it general. And then the convention here is to always, after you define these arguments, make sure you define this. And then you don't always have to put like self that, and then it's the same as what your argument is here. It could be anything, but by convention, always make this the same as what you're assigning it, so that, like, you're not getting confused. But so the same with the self.sound. And the reason why, as I said, like, every time you're defining an instance, the self will get replaced by what you named it. Okay, so now you have that, and now let's define the instance. So when you initialize these instances of the class, you just do this the same way as you've been defining variables, but then now you want to put in, the class name. And then mainly how you do this is you ignore self, and then you just put in like these different inputs. So that's why it's important, when you want to, like, for example, you don't have access to this and you want to put in doc strings to what these arguments are. You want to tell the user in a doc string what I can put inside the class. So that's one way that you could do that. So for example, so this, I want to define it as like any animal and then the sound they make. So this is the convention. You create the class, you create the constructor, and then you initialize the variables. And you just keep on repeating this, and then just remember what the inputs are. And you create this, and then I'm just printing things out. Okay, so for the next one here, why don't we combine both of them, methods and group and attributes. So same thing, zoo group, and then the class attribute. Oh yeah, the other thing is to this class attribute, it doesn't change on the instance. It's always going to be the same because it's like a class attribute. But for this initial or instance attribute, this changes depending on what your inputs are. So I just kind of expanded this. The one thing now that we're combining different like parts is the naming scheme is very important so that you keep track of what you're doing. So I just did this: animal number, animal type, and sound. And then for something I want to do with that, it's pretty common, like after you define like these attributes, is you want to create a method. And then, this method doesn't really have like its own like, it only has self as its own argument, but you can actually create a method that has its own inputs as well. For this one, we're just going to pass whatever variable you defined here. So this is what I'm doing. I'm trying to print a sentence using the instance arguments. So I'm passing all of this after I define it for each one, and then I'm going to print out a sentence. So, animal 1, animal 2, 3, you get the convention. So it's pretty much the only thing you're changing for each one are the inputs. And then after that, it's really nice because then there's a system now, when you're doing this. And then, so as you see here, I'm just printing out the method output and then the class attribute output. So the class attribute is always going to be whatever this is, right? So it's animals. And then for each one of those, like the method that I wanted to print is going to be different because of the inputs. So that's what that is. And then here is just, something interesting. I'm just giving you guys some flavor and what you could do. It's like I created this McDonald's group. So, I'm just finding the same convention, group type foods. So you could really see like, like just remembering these three parts, the naming, the attributes, and the method, you can really extend this to like different like applications. And then now for this next example, I'm just going to explain to you guys how to combine what you've learned already from loops, conditionals, methods, classes. This first one here is an interesting one. So I'll talk about this in the next one, but you can import like turtle first. What I'm trying to do here is I want to draw like different shapes. So, and then I'm going to use this turtle to draw out like an external shape. It just draws it automatically. So what I would have to define as first is the characteristic of the shape. So that's why I have this. So this is going to define it. And here, I don't have a class attribute. I only have an instance attribute. So you know the part where that needs most work is probably defining this, because then you got to know, okay, what different things do I want my shape to have? So you have this, and then the next one here is like a method. After defining the attributes, you have like, you know, a for loop here. This is how I'm creating the shape. Let me just explain how that works. So with that, I define this shape. So this is going to be a pentagon, and it's going to be color blue. So let me see if this works. Oh, here we go. It's on the other screen. So it is a pentagon. So so this is what Turtle does. And then, but the main point here is you know, you define a shape, you define the attributes, and then you define like a method to use the attributes. And then to call out initialize the class, you call an instance here, and then you call out the class name, and then you give it its inputs. And then whatever method you have is after you define the instance, you just do the instance name and then dot whatever this method is. So that's the basic parts. And now we're gonna add conditionals into the loops. So I'm gonna just breeze through these because we've already learned the basics. But this one is just, you know, what if you had like maybe a car or whatever, a house, an inventory. That's like one of the main things you can use a class in, is to organize different like things that have similar attributes. So for this one, I'm gonna have like a listing or like a house inventory. So the first thing here is just doing an init. So what this is doing is just defining variables that I want to initialize. So like the number of houses, and then a list of like, you know, where I'm going to put the inventory. So it's an empty list now. And then I have two methods here. The first one, it's going to add like a house to each one depending on the attribute. And I'm going to explain each part. Just look to this after. But here I define this in a different way. So I define it as like dictionary. You could certainly do that. And then this is just adding to the number of houses or like inventory, whatever it may be. And this next method, what I'm trying to do, like, so you know how like the other one, we only had like this method with a self. It didn't really intake any new arguments. But these ones, I'm just giving you guys an example where you can add different, for each method you have, it doesn't have to just be a self input. It can be like different things. So now here, I'm not going to explain each part, but I have a for loop and a conditional. What this is essentially doing is trying to compare, like, what if I wanted to query the highest number or the, you know, cheapest number, like house, or the highest number of bedrooms or square footage, whatever it may be. So, and this is how I'm working with that. So same thing, initialize, and then using a method, and then different inputs, and then using the second method. And then after you do that, you can always play around with this. Just remember, like, you know, when you're trying to declare it, you know, define it first, and then initialize, and then using the method. So this other one is a vitamin group. This is just the name of it. So it's the same thing. I'm just, you know, showing you guys different examples, how you can apply it. But let's move on to like the last example. So this one just shows you like, what if you wanted to define now multiple classes, but not only define multiple, but then what if you want to use like the previous class to define the next class. And then what you want to do here is we call that class inheritance, where you pass that like the characters or the attributes of a previous class to the new class. So just to explain like the background of these two classes. So the first one here, this is just, I just created like a library, maybe kind of like bookkeeping. You know, you have your books in the library and then the title of the book, number of pages. But then besides that, what if I wanted to apply now from, you know, use whatever info they had in the library and then maybe create like my own grouping. So my group here is called My Favorite Book. So what you would do is after you create that first class, it's really simple. You just put, instead of self, I mean, you're not gonna, you know, what you want to do is just use this first class and put it inside the argument of your class or your next class. And from that, you can, it acquires most of these, but then there's a second thing you want to know once you define these, the init or like different methods here, you want to remember this thing. So what if I wanted to use this like previously init function and then, or init, yeah, this title and then the pages into this new class? What I would do is like, you would define similarly the init function, and then you put self, and you still put the title and the pages, right? Like, so that's because what I had before. But now I want to put in the genre. So this is something new that I want to put in here. So I just put that in there, but then you want to define this though. So you put super, and then the parentheses, and then dot, and whatever the name of this is, and then whatever it was before, the inputs without the self though. And then you still define the self that, you know, in the variables you have the same way, but not all of them, because this first part is already calling out these two. So you're already transferring that over. So you only have to define the self that the argument for the new for the new input that you're putting in here. So I hope that makes sense. It's just a convention. So once you're passing it over, that's not the only thing. Once you're define the init, you need to put this super and then this convention, and then only add the ones that you're adding. And then with that, you know, you can create as many functions, as many method functions that you want. And the same way, you know, initialize. And then now, because you've created that new group, you just call out the new group's name and then its inputs. So, you know, if you look over here, this is always a guide. Like, what are the inputs that I need to put in here is go back to your edit and then look at all the inputs after the self. So that's what you need to define. And then this other one is calling out the method within your class is just the instance name and then dot and then the method name. And that's pretty much it. That's creating classes in a nutshell. Hope you guys have fun doing that. If you have any questions, just let us know.
Hi. Actually, I have a question regarding the part 3 of this coding lab.
Okay.
So in the last part, it asked us to like create a function to calculate like the number of day in the time period. So
that one. Okay.
yeah, so basically I try to write a function, but then when I try to pass the assert under that, it tells me there's a name error, and I don't know how to like input the date time into the function, because it can I paste my code into the command section?
Okay. Do you have can I see what you have? You want to share your screen? Okay, let me stop sharing.
Okay, so I shared the screen, right?
Okay, go ahead. I'll try to guide you. Okay, I see it now.
So this is my code, but when I try to do this, it just tell me like there's a name error, but I don't know what's wrong with it.
Date time. Okay. Did you try importing the date time or first?
So you mean under this,
it'll be before the you do anything. So like above, far the first line. After, yeah, that one, yeah.
So import?
Just type in like, let me see, from, you could put import date time. Yeah, try do that.
Like that?
Yeah, and then try run it again. Module is not callable. Try to write this instead. From date time. And then next to that, space import. Should have worked. Date, then comma time, comma date time, comma time delta. And try to run that.
Yeah, try, but it also shows like type error.
Let me look at what you have now in the function. So assert count days date time, okay. Type error. So you've imported, so it's in the assert, right? Can you scroll down a bit?
Mm-hmm.
Can't compare datetime to datetime.date. Oh, hold up. Datetime.datetime. Where is that one? What line? 8.
Line 8, this, I think.
Okay. Yeah, so it is within the function. So now that you've imported it, it's somewhere where you're comparing the start date and the end date. Okay, let me see if I can, because I've already created this one actually. Let me go back to my, okay. Date time, okay. What is the count weekdays? You know, like it says assert there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And can you try to output what that says? Like just copy count weekdays up, not out and up to the equal sign. I just want to see what it outputs. Okay, so you have an error there.
Yeah.
Okay.
It says like after the while condition, I'm comparing the start date with the end date, but it says like one of them is like a datetime object and the other is a date object. So
Yeah, it's like
I cannot compare them together.
it does work, but then the thing is like it's like apples and oranges. So we need to put in like the right variable. Can you type in start date? What is that and the end date? I don't know if we can see what's happening there.
Yeah, so I think the start date is just what it given us.
Or start date.
Wait, where should I find the start date? I think the start date is already, it's the date that is already given us. Like
Yeah, it's like you
this is
you
the
defined
start
it.
date.
Yeah, so you define that, and then the end date, you have that. Okay. Time delta counter, and then your end date, so your end date, your start date is a number. Okay, and then your end date is not a number. It's
Wait, why is my start date a number? I thought it's the start date is this part, like the date time after that.
So that's date time. Oh, I think I know. I think what happened. Let me think. Stop here. That one. What is it? So output that end date, like you know that at the top it says date, just the date, everything on the right of the equal sign. I want to know what that shows. Like, what is that showing? Because
This?
that's the end date, yeah. So I'll try to put in what that outputs. Or like define what's your stop year?
Wait, I'm confused. Why is it?
1324. Try to type in 1324. It's because it's inside the function, that's why. You have to hard code it to check.
So how should I change it?
Okay, so like I just want to see like what it outputs when you call out date. So like you had in date stop year, right? So
Yeah.
like at the bottom, not here, don't change this. Try to go on the bottom, type date, and then your stop year is 1324, right? I think is it 1324?
Yes, 1324.
Okay. I think I may know what's going on. On your end date, try type in date time instead of date. Or does that not work?
Like this?
Yeah. Does that not work, or because that's
Okay,
what?
now it works.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
So why should I define it as date time rather than date? What's the difference between the two?
It's just two different things. So that's why I wanted to know, because you have to use either date for both or date time. That's what it is.
But like the input, they both input like year, month, and day. So they're basically the same thing, but they're like they have different names.
Yeah, like you know how like up top you said from date time you imported date time time delta.
Yeah.
Those are different function names. So like even though I guess you gotta be sure that it's outputting the right, like an integer or whatever. Like I don't know what date is gonna output. That's why. But I know datetime is an integer. It says 27, or like that. No, not like the datetime itself gives you like the year, month, and then the day. It just has to match like both the start date and then the end date.
Oh, okay, I get it. So basically the question provided us a format as like daytime. So we also need to define it as
exactly
the same format.
It's the same format, yeah. Yeah, you could have used date. There's no issue there. It's just now you have to, because like the assert check is doing date time, right? So you have to match that function, the date time function.
Okay. So and also another question. So basically for every time we use this kind of like module or something, we have to first import it.
Yeah, that's something I'm gonna talk about that next week. But like I guess to preview it, like date time is one of those things. Like it's like a built. I would say it's still in Python, but it's just not in the standard. Like anything that's not in the standard, like for example, let me say like while or like if, whatever, like any of these commands return, like those are already, you don't have to like import them. But there's like ones, which I'll talk about next week, that you have to like import them in. But they're really helpful though. The reason why for that is or like there's two things. The reason why is like it makes it faster if you don't have all of them loading at the start.
Okay.
But then like where do you look for them? So that's like, I guess the documentation, you could use that, or you could just Google search it. Like you have something you want to like learn. It's like, just type in like Python modules, and then they're all called, there are like when you're importing them, they're called modules. But the way you do it is you import them.
So if I want to import these modules, should I do it can I do it all at the top of this document, and I can just do it once and then I can use it all over through? But I remember I imported at the top because it asked us to import it, right? Just right before this part. But then why do I have to import it again in this?
Okay, I guess that's a good question. What I usually do is, you're right. You could import it like way above, all the way up top.
Mm-hmm.
But then like, I don't know. Sometimes Python has like this thing where it overwrites, different.
Oh,
Yeah. So like the best thing, so you don't have this like overwritten thing, overwrite error or whatever. You just define it within your code block.
okay. So every time I use it for the sake of like correctness, I need to like import it first and then I use it.
Yeah.
Like
Every time
I
you're
use
using it within the code block. I always see code blocks as like separate things. Like the
Okay.
notebook is just a set of code blocks, but try to define everything in like that one code block.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Goodbye.